Welcome to tonight's debate on Islam and feminism. Which one can truly liberate women? It's the topic I'm sure you're all obviously interested in. That's why you're here. I'm sure those that aren't here also, it's a topic that we hear about a lot in the media, wherever you look. This debate has been organised with the Muslim Debate Initiative, and we'll look at the religion of Islam, feminism, and women's liberation. To start off the discussion, we'll hear from our two speakers on my left and right. After which we'll open up the discussion to the floor and we'll take questions from all of yourselves. So with that in mind, do consider the arguments and critiques you'll be hearing and try and analyse them, write down your questions, think about the different things that are being put forward. This is going to be an open argument zone debate, which means we'll focus on the content and weight of the discussions. So to introduce our speakers, we have Julie Bindel, a journalist, broadcaster, author and feminist campaigner. She writes for The Guardian, New Statesman, Standpoint Magazine, The Spectator and The Sunday Telegraph. Julie writes about affairs concerning women and children, but also about culture, music, food, film, sexual and gender identity. She travelled to Nevada to spend a week in legal brothels, to Florida to visit death row inmates, and the Middle East to visit Syrian refugee camps, as well as recently publishing the book Straight Expectations. Our second esteemed speaker, Zara Faris. Zara is a graduate at Arabic and Islamic Studies from SOAS University around the corner. She lived in Egypt for a year studying the Arabic language and is now a researcher and international speaker for the Muslim Debate Initiative. She delivers lectures at many universities in the UK, including Ireland and Germany, on subjects of women in Islam, justice, women and men, feminism, reformation and revival, and Muslims in the West. She also regularly comments on television and has publicly debated Do Women Need Feminism with Green Party leader Natalie Bennett and Do Women Need Power with London councillor Rania Khan. Tonight's event will proceed as follows. We'll hear a 15-minute presentation from both of our speakers, followed by 10-minute rebuttals from each of the speakers, and then 5-minute closing statements, after which we'll have our Q&A session where you can ask all of your questions. So without further ado, kicking off with the case that feminism can truly liberate women, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Julie Bindel, to make her presentation for the case of feminism.
Thank you very much, and I'm really appreciative of the invitation from Zara, who I met when we were both debating a similar topic to this for Voice of Russia radio. And whatever the debate is tonight between us, however heated it might get, whatever the deep divisions might be within our political philosophies and approaches, we were as one when a very misogynistic, reactionary cleric came on the phone saying that women should basically be at home under subjugation. So we were both there flying the flag, I would say, for feminism. And I precede that just so that we know that, I consider you my sister, and I'm sure that when there are really serious issues facing us as women, then that we should bond together. However, I'm a rabid secularist, but an equal opportunities one, because I really am as critical of all three major religions and a few of the fringe ones with pretty much equal venom. So Judaism, Christianity, Islam. I think that ultimately religion is bad for women. I think that women cannot flourish living under religious law. It can be the Quran, the Bible, the New Testament, the Old Testament, the Talmud can all be interpreted, reinterpreted, misinterpreted. You can go and do what my brother-in-law does, who's a religious Jew, a Hasid, and go and rabbi shop to find the rabbi that will give the correct ruling when he wants to do something, whether it's drink a particular whiskey at Passover or attend his sister's civil partnership. So I think for women, for me, there can be no question that religion is an oppressive force. It's man-made, it serves men, and its primary imperative is to control the behaviour and sexuality, sexual behaviour, and freedom of movement of women and their children. So I'm sure you were about to applaud, but you were told not to do it so often. So I'll take that as an absolute agreement, shall I? I think we need feminism more than ever right now, simply because of the backlash that has, I think, been nourished and nurtured through the rise of religious fundamentalism worldwide. And we hear much about how that rise is mainly Islam, but it isn't. It's all three major religions. Now, I was interested to see when looking at, do women need feminism? What will liberate women, which of course I'm saying is feminism as opposed to Islam, is the Young Foundation, which many of you will know, founded a social enterprise this year to encourage more Muslim young women into feminism, in fact, women of all ages. Now, we may well hear from my colleague when she speaks that feminism is a white Western concept that has no relevance in countries such as Pakistan, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, wherever. And I would absolutely fundamentally disagree with that. Because, of course, we know that there are thriving women's movements in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, in Pakistan, in many, many countries where women have been thoroughly oppressed, as we have everywhere in the world, in every country, under patriarchy. So what's really interesting about the Young Foundation is that it had a huge response from many Muslim women who hadn't left their religion behind, who hadn't said, well, we can be one or the other, or feminism says that we can't have our own private belief, which I believe religion is. It's a personal private belief, it shouldn't be attached to the state. They said that they had been precluded from feminism because of religious elders, because of patriarchs, because of men in their families who say feminism is a dirty word, they're all man-haters and lesbians, and what they'll do is they'll prevent you from being involved in religion. And they also, many of these young women said, if you look on the website, they said, these debates about feminism and Islam are only ever held in academia. And we don't get the chance to actually be there saying, well, yes, I'm a Muslim, I'm a religious Muslim, but yes, I think feminism is absolutely not just relevant to me, but utterly crucial. And in the past few years, we've seen the rise of a feminism in countries where we are told constantly by religious elders doesn't exist, shouldn't exist, and in fact thinks that we're just all, bourgeois Western women who are trying to impose something upon them. And we saw with the Arab Spring, we saw in Egypt that women were leading that revolution. And I'm in touch with feminists all over the world, in a number of countries where it's almost criminal to be an out feminist. And what happened after the women led the revolution? Well, it didn't become a revolution. It became a male takeover, where Egyptian Muslim woman after Egyptian Muslim woman started to write about, blog about, speak about how she had been sexually assaulted and harassed by male comrades during this quest for revolution, for equality, and where they have now been utterly sidelined because, of course, it was a threat to men on the left. On the left. This is why we need feminism. With social media, obviously, more women who are trapped within the confines of extreme patriarchy can now become feminists, even if it's online to begin with. But what we're finding is women from, as I say, all over the world are engaging in discussions about oppression, repression. We also know that the first time that Islamic feminism was used as a term, as a phrase, it was in 1990, and in 1992, the feminist writer Shala Shakot, an Iranian who took part in the 1979 revolution, published the first issue of the Islamic feminist newsletter. But it was banned. It was banned by the state. So if we see that as a response by patriarchal male elders, whether they're religious, political, whatever, as the threat of feminism, that tells us more than anything that we need feminism. Okay. Zara may well argue that we all should be fighting injustice and that why choose feminism as an elitist movement? Well, because other social justice movements are allowed to have a priority. Other social justice movements that fight for an end to racism or an end to poverty aren't always told that their fight is irrelevant because they're not also fighting class oppression, race oppression, etc., etc. Now, of course, to be a feminist, you have to also deplore and be against all the other institutionalised oppressions and inequalities in society. But feminists have a right to prioritise the liberation of women from male oppression. And I'm not an equalities feminist. I think equality is for cowards. We're not on the same playing field. If we had 50% of women in Parliament in the UK, guess who'd shout the loudest and drown that 50% out? We need far more than 50%. So Zara might also argue that, of course, because there are different types of feminism and different ways to be a feminist, and all these kind of disparate women with all these weird views, that contradicts the basis of feminism, that feminism has no aim, has no direction. Well, what I'll say to that is, that's right, there are millions of types of feminism, but it's mine that's correct, right? It's not Margaret Thatcher's feminism. It's not the pole dancey way to liberation feminism of the fourth wave. It's not the slut walk, let's just sort of think about the rights of the individual. It's feminism that's a political collective movement that says women are oppressed not by each individual man in all of our life circumstances, but by the system that privileges them for being born male. That when women own 1% of the property in the world, when we do 66% of the work, but when we only earn overall globally 11% of the international wage, whatever, then I think we're looking at oppression. We can also see domestic violence, rape, forced marriage, child sexual abuse. We can't deny that those things are gendered. We can say, of course, that some men suffer domestic violence. We can also look at the skewed figures that suggest that 40% of men are the victims of female domestic violence, when in fact never a bed has been slept in a refuge set up for male victims of domestic violence. There are barely any homicides, murders or manslaughters by women who've been repeatedly beating and stalking their male victims. The morgues are full of women who are the victims of serious domestic violence. There are 10 times the number of women and their children living in bed and breakfast accommodation because the refuges are so full. I'm sure that some of you might say, it's the stigma, men can't report domestic violence. That's not true. If you're running for your life and trying to protect your children, you get over that stigma. Women face stigma constantly. When we're told that we're to blame for rape, when we're stoned to death for being raped, when we're told that we're liars, that's a women's thing. That's not when male rape victims come forward. They have a dreadful ordeal within the criminal justice system. But it is a male on female myth that says that women are making this up, and if we are raped, we are to blame. It's literally written within some of our legal systems. So I've probably only got 1 minute, so violence, of course, most violence in the world is perpetrated by men on men. So most victims of violence are men. That's because men are socialised into, not born into, responding with violence if they can't win an argument. This filters down to the great discredit of women and children, who are supposed to live under those circumstances of war, of conflict, where if we get in the way, we are the primary victims of that violence ourselves. The difference between the violence that women face from men is that we are violated and beaten and raped and tortured and forced into situations we don't want to be in because we are women and girls. So I'll end by saying, everywhere in the world, we have patriarchy. Everywhere in the world, women live under a system of oppression. Some countries, some legal systems, some regions are worse than others. But one thing is for certain, there's only one thing that unites all women everywhere. And it's not Islam, and it's not Christianity, and it's not Judaism. In fact, it's not religion at all. It is, I'm afraid, the threat, the fear, and the reality of sexual and domestic violence. If we haven't been raped or beaten, we live in fear of it, even if it's unconscious and we don't realise that we don't want to take a taxi or go out on our own late at night in case it happens to us. It unites us, and it's the only thing that does. And what also unites women all over the world is the growing feminist movement that recognises that it's not a white Western bourgeois concept. It's a politics of liberation, and it's the only thing that can free us from the tyranny of our oppression. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. Take this to our second speaker, Zara Faris, arguing the case that Islam can truly liberate women. Zara.
So, liberation. We've heard a lot tonight about, the word liberation, justice, these kinds of concepts. But what actually is liberation? And it's a word that's bandied around by virtually every group that is jostling for its own territory today. And everyone talks passionately about wanting liberation. These are the reasons why. This is what happens to us. We need liberation. They talk about wanting it for themselves. And often, in the case of Western cultural imperialism, they talk about imposing it on others as well. But few, very few, talk about what it actually means. What do they need to be liberated from, and what do they need to be liberated to? And unfortunately, even fewer people question the basis of their own concept of liberation. If by liberation people mean freedom from external influences, such as our environment, then this is impossible because unless we're created outside of the universe, humans are shaped and limited by their own environments. For example, our families, societies, the climate. If by liberation people mean freedom from internal influences, for example, human nature or genetics, then this is also absurd because humans are defined by their nature, for example, by our social instincts and basic needs to eat. These are things which are undeniable. The real question, therefore, is not whether we can attain freedom from either these internal or external influences. Rather, the question is actually which influences should we embrace and which influences should we reject. And in essence, the question is how should we live and how exactly do we determine this, whether you're man, woman, whatever. And this can only be answered by examining the purpose of humans, and no movement can offer liberation without knowing what human purpose actually is. Now, currently, Western culture and civilization is very much based on the dogma of individualism, of which feminism, by and large, is simply another subset. And individualism makes the assumption that humans are merely individuals, just individuals with no purpose except to exist as individuals. But humans, like cells in the human body, aren't merely individuals. We're social creatures. We're defined by society, by culture, parents, genetics, the languages we're taught, which no human being can learn without being taught by another person. We're creatures that have many instinctive needs that can only be fulfilled by other people. And this is why, for example, solitary confinement is one of the most inhumane punishments imaginable. Humans were created in the universe, along with their nature and their genetics. Humans didn't create the universe or their own nature or genetics. Humans are naturally, mostly passive recipients of all of these realities, and there's no escape from that. And these realities actually emerge from a higher truth of which we are all part. Individualism's claim is to put the individual above those realities, and this is what it calls liberation. But it's actually its biggest delusion because it orphans humans from their higher purpose, rendering their lives meaningless and vulnerable to oppression by the vanities of simply those who are stronger in society. So does feminism offer a purpose for women, and can it really claim to understand what women, who are part of the human species, actually need? Now, feminism, like I said earlier, is largely based on individualism, and it too claims it wants to free the individual from all these imposing influences like God, culture, society, and including gender roles, all in the name of individual freedom. But it actually lacks any idea about human purpose and consequently how humans, more specifically female humans, should actually be living. And in this ideological void, feminists ironically adopt imitation, making men and male roles the object of emulation. And there are, of course, some serious problems with these dogmas, making feminism incapable of liberating women. And the first problem, and Julie maybe alluded to this earlier, is the problem of meaning and purpose. Simply saying that women can do as they wish and give themselves their own meaning is like having a dictionary with words but no definitions in it. In offering women no valid purpose or meaning, feminism actually leaves women more open to the vagaries and capriciousness of those social forces that have always inculcated in them their own tastes and preferences. Feminism isn't liberating women from this base causality. All it's doing is adding new social pressures, constituting a new form of oppression against women. For example, many feminists will advocate that women should be able to wear whatever they want. They can reject social norms of propriety, which basically has opened Pandora's box of female exploitation, with the fashion and media industry turning women into one-dimensional sexual objects and mass consumers. New social pressures of beauty have caused the rise of eating disorders amongst women, with girls aged only 15 to 19 having the highest incidence of eating disorders such as anorexia and bulimia. I don't think Julie Binder will dispute with me on any of this. And so much does this industry make the woman hate her own body that labiaplasty, which is basically FGM, has become the second fastest growing form of cosmetic surgery in the US and the third most popular in the UK. Although some feminists will recognize these social pressures, they don't know how to challenge it without compromising the dogma of individual freedom that created them in the first place. Another example, feminists claim that female liberation is about being identical to male roles, making it incumbent on women to be successful career women, and often belittling those women who choose to be full-time parents as not achieving their full potential and letting society down. Simone de Beauvoir, for example, who was very prominent during the second wave of feminism, said the following. She said, "No woman should be authorized to stay at home to raise her children. Women should not have that choice, precisely because if there is such a choice, too many women will make it." She said it's a way of forcing women in a certain direction. So can this arbitrary imitation really make women happier? Studies now show, for example, that women in business leadership roles are reported as 47% more likely to suffer from depression than men in similar jobs. In addition, feminism can't really liberate people from the injustices caused by capitalism. Even if you had an all-female society, you would still have a large unjust gap between the rich and the poor, and there's no alternative system posited by feminism for this. All feminists argue for is an equal representation in an already unjust system. Rather than standing for social justice and challenging the economic system that has enslaved millions of men in debt, feminists have simply served up women for exploitation as well, making it a necessity for women to now work. And now the powerful elite gets to enslave, exploit, and tax the female half of society too. I don't really call that progress. They don't care that the cake is poisoned as long as they get at least half of it. The second problem is the problem of biological reality. Now, almost all living creatures have organized gender roles with different biological abilities across the sexes. Yet feminists are ideologically compelled to claim that somehow humans are exempt from this natural order and that gender differences are purely social inventions with absolutely no biological differences between men or women that should inform their social roles. For example, the predominance of testosterone in males has been scientifically shown to not just build physical muscle, but it also increases psychological competitiveness, confidence, and risk-taking, which makes men more equipped to tackle hazardous and competitive roles in society. Psychologists have found also, for example, that even girls that were exposed to very high levels of testosterone whilst in the womb show more male-typical behaviors, such as an increase in rough and tumble play and aggression, and more male-typical toy preferences as well. So not only does feminism's insistence that all women compete for traditional male roles at the expense of traditional female roles force women to unfairly compare themselves to men, but it also ignores women's own tendencies and proclivities and has actually made it much more difficult for women to commit, for example, to motherhood or spend time with their families. It seems the only thing feminism actually liberates women from is from being women. Now, the third problem is the problem of absolute equality. And I'm glad that Julie, to some extent, might agree with me on this, because it really is ridiculous. But where does the obsession for absolute equality come from? Because a lot of feminists do advocate this view. Thank you. Are we all biologically identical? No. Do any two people, regardless of gender, have equal strength, weakness, or ability? No. Equality doesn't exist in nature, so why do any feminists think that humans should be leveled and forced into any kind of homogenous boxes? And feminists too realized this when they saw the equal treatment of men and women still didn't yield the equal outcomes they'd actually hoped for. Even in meritocratic environments, women still preferred a work-life balance that actually involved less hours than men did, and a lot of them actually leaving their careers to pursue motherhood and family. Yet feminists insist on kind of hiding this reality by claiming women were forced to make those choices due to the continued gender discrimination within those institutions. Another important difference is that men and women also don't walk away from adult relationships on an equal footing. Instead of calling for a better contractual safeguard for women, feminism has instead empowered women to have casual relationships without commitment, leaving women quite literally often holding the baby. You see, feminists demanded the full suite of reproductive rights for women, such as the right to decide whether to keep, abort, or give away their children. And women, and they basically, in obtaining all these rights for themselves, reserved only the financial obligations for men. So a woman, for example, has an automatic right to her children, regardless of whether she's married or not, but imposes a financial obligation on the man to pay child support, whilst denying him a necessary right to a relationship with his biological children. In effect, a tax without representation. So are these really equal rights between men and women? Consider, for example, the female quotas that Julie mentioned earlier for polished boardroom jobs, but the distinct lack of quotas for jobs that women simply don't want to do. Garbage collection, animal slaughter, coal mining, anybody? Bomb disposal, fish trawling? No. Consider the feminist campaigns for women to receive the lion's share of institutional support for domestic violence, cancer research, rape support, etc., despite men being vulnerable at similar or even higher rates in some instances. Now, feminism finally has mutated into outright female privilege and gender sectarianism, demanding more of the privileges and less of the responsibilities. If feminism is supposed to be a response to the injustices it perceives, it's pretty ironic that it has adopted the same modus operandi of its perceived oppressors. Feminists didn't liberate women from an oppressive system that perpetuates injustice. All it's done is given them a stake in it. So should women really achieve liberation through feminism's injustice? Does this sound like a movement that can truly liberate women? Now, to turn to the answer, what about Islam? Does Islam liberate us? Now, Julie mentioned some things earlier which were to do with Christianity and Judaism, but we're here talking about Islam, so maybe we could have those on a different discussion. But I understand the point that she was raising was that she wasn't particularly targeting Islam alone. Unfortunately, a lot of the anecdotes or kind of hearsay things that Julie brought up, no doubt there are evidences of these horrific things taking place, but they're all taking place by and large, if not completely, in post-colonial countries that are now where the Muslims live, that are essentially secular countries. They're not actually Islamic countries. And, for example, one of the issues that Julie Bindel raised was, sexual harassment that took place during the protests in the Arab Spring and things. And it's quite interesting because a lot of those incidences actually took place in the pro-secular protests. There weren't actually any reported incidences of sexual harassment from the Islamic or Rabi al-Adawiyya protests. So there's essentially a problem here, which is, a lot of the things that are going on in the Muslim world are secular problems. They're not Islamic problems. Those systems are not Islamic systems. They are secular systems, which is why we see the oppression there, which is why we see oppression not just against women, but against men too. And just as an example, we heard, some of the things that Julie Bindel raised. Just in a country, for example, Saudi Arabia, it's not actually, we don't consider it to be an Islamic state or an Islamic country. It's a monarchy. Again, it has, different constitution to what Islam recognizes as being Islamic. But even there, where they decided to apply just a few token factors. For example, recently in Saudi Arabia, one husband he beat his wife, and the state issued corporal punishment against him, 30 lashes, 10 days of training in how to actually treat women. Another man was sentenced to 20 lashes simply for saying something which defamed his wife about her good character. And so, you know, why didn't we hear these anecdotes? And the thing is, anecdotes alone don't convince anybody of an ideology, because anecdotes alone are not the basis for an ideology. We have to look at the purpose, and we have to look at what justice actually is and how you actually achieve this. So, you know, the reality is that Islam liberates us from this enslavement to causality by submitting ourselves to the ultimate cause. And Islam gives a purpose that is higher than selfishness, and it gives direction to both men and women, and it provides us with a clear moral yardstick and a justification for what is just and what is not, and it provides a method. God says in the Quran, "I do not waste the deed of any doer among you, be they male or female. The one of you is as the other." In Islam, ranking in the eyes of God and peers is according to virtue and justice. It's not to do with your wealth, your looks, your power, unlike in the materialistic West. Islam grants no privileges. It gives authority to people only with commensurate responsibility and accountability. Feminism gives no critical rights that women can expect from her marriage partner. However, Islam liberates women by giving women the rights to have her human needs fulfilled by her partner in marriage, which feminism and its individualistic basis does not provide. And these include the right to respect, affection, and time from her husband, the right to sexual satisfaction by her husband, the right to shelter provided by her husband, the right to food and clothing equal in quality to her husband, the right to physical protection provided by her husband, the right to a dowry and alimony. And now we heard some things from Julie Bindel earlier about how Muslims treat their women, but we didn't actually hear any discussion of the actual principles of Islam. Where in Islam does it say that men should treat women like this? Where in Islam does it say that people should be abused in this way? If we're going to talk about Islam, we have to talk about what Islam says, not what is being practiced in the post-colonial Muslim world today, like Pakistan and Egypt and all these places. Unlike feminism, Islam doesn't stop at justice for just one gender, but rather liberation for all. Islam posits an alternative to the exploitative unjust system of capitalism, which, like feminism, does emanate from individualism. And, you know, to end, because I see I'm running out of time, essentially, Islam liberates us from a worldview such as, you know, feminist individualism that promises freedom, but actually enslaves the masses to blind conformance under just simply a new form of oppression. So in the words of the Creator, "Have you not seen those who make their own desires their lords? They are like cattle, nay, they are worse." And unlike the gods of feminism, our God is actually without gender. Thank you so much.